Hello, I'm Terry Watts and welcome back. This is part 6 of my Manifesto for Change for the Built Environment. Hope you enjoy it. Today we're going to talk about the business model, and in preparing this bit it's been quite interesting because since I did the last one, the whole thinking I have on the business model has changed because two things have happened, or lots of things have happened, but two things have come to my attention, I guess you'd say, and two new things have been announced in the last few days which have changed the whole thing. So it's really exciting for me because I think a lot of the ingredients we need are there. It's just a question of how do we move forward. So let me just remind you of how we got to this point, and you'll recognize this diagram. So previously we talked about the built environment itself, and how it needs to be more than just construction, the image of the sector as a whole, the culture that pervades the sector, engagement and leadership was last time, and today the business model. So let's go on to the business model. Well, they say a week is a long while in politics, but it feels like an awful lot has happened in the last week or so in the built environment, for me anyway. The latest thing that's happened was this morning, the Construction Leadership Council announced its roadmap for recovery. And if you haven't seen it, it's on all of the construction news, construction manager sites and things. But I got this from Construction Buzz from UK Construction Week. So there's information there about the roadmap for recovery the CLC have come up with, and apparently been working behind the scenes, maybe not behind the scenes to you, but certainly to me, with trying to understand how they can help and advise the government to support the industry in coming back from the COVID crisis. And it's lots of work in there. There's a big presentation. There's quite a lot of facts and data in there. And it's a great summary of the issues. They're not specifically saying these are the issues and we're going to directly address them. But if you look behind the things they're suggesting that we needed to do, inferred from those solutions are the issues that we're facing in the sector. And I was pleased to see that actually it confirms my belief. I think they see much the same issues in the sector as I do, and many other people do as well. It was fascinating as well that they started to define the construction sector, or they didn't give it a name actually, but the sector is not just construction, and they talked about a contracting part of the sector. So this is the section in the top left there of what they talked about, and the size of the sector, nearly 9% of GDP, huge amount of investment revenue and income from there, and employment, 3.1 million people included in the sector, which is probably what I would start to call the built environment, but they include in that the contracting sector rather in construction of 2.3 million, which is the usual number from the CITB of what the current size of the industry is. So interestingly, they're starting to think beyond just construction as well, which is great. I just wish they'd call it something else, but that's good. Maybe that is getting through from somewhere. And they have an extensive list of actions and activities, initiatives that are there to try and help. So changing the contracting model to try and encourage collaboration and reduce the amount of disputes that go on in the industry. Protecting new recruits is great. They recognise that people are going to struggle to take on apprentices, or if they have, when the furlough schemes come in, the newest people in might be the first ones to go. So there's all that worry going on, not just in construction, but everywhere. And restarting the ecosystem. I think it's fascinating because they recognise there's an ecosystem in construction as well, the built environment as well, which I think is really good. And some work about loan finance, how it's difficult to get loans, and the security of insurance and so on is a problem that they think there are some solutions for, which is all good stuff. I think that's great. They come up with 3 phases: a restart, a reset, which says get things moving again, look at what we need to do, and then let's reinvent the sector as a 3rd phase. And it's not that far away. In a year or so's time, to try and by subsector make the place a better place to be, and they're looking at all those things above there. So I kind of feel that's really good news. And they also recognise the issues with COVID working. It's going to make it more difficult possibly to work on site. They may need fewer people working on one site, which may make projects last longer, cost more, all those extra costs and things. It's all good. The only thing I'd criticise it for is it does focus a lot on costs and finances. And I think that's only part of the issue, but we'll come on to that. So that was the first thing, or the second thing actually, but the biggest thing that happened, and that happened this morning. And so that was quite a change in my way of thinking when I saw this. So it was quite a good trigger. The second thing that was really influential in my week was I joined a webinar with the guys from, or Rob Wolf actually, from Chai Consulting, and he introduced me to the idea of how he's looking at the social value and how that can be consistently measured across different sectors. And just before that was an announcement from ACE of the measurement for successful outcomes, 5 the 5 capitals approach and how they've applied that to the built environment sector. And I think that was really fascinating, actually. I really enjoyed that, and I recommend you have a look at that. It was launched, I think, on the 27th of May. So it's only not even a week ago yet, but that's a really good paper talking about how you might use all of that kind of activity. And in the same presentation, the Construction Innovation Hub presented their take on the 5 values. And for those of you who don't know 5 values, basically there are 5 areas: natural, social, human, manufactured and financial impacts that you can have on defining value, and they go into each of them there. And you can see on the diagram, the bottom left there, they talk about the air quality under natural, land quality, water quality, biodiversity, and the social captures a lot of things that are important to me as well, with communities and citizens I've talked about before. Equality, sourcing and skills comes in under human, with safety, employment and mental and physical well-being. Then the manufactured bit is another thing I'll talk a bit more about next week when we go on to technology, but about the carbon and resources, use of resources, production and productivity and so on, and how you do more manufacturing and less on-site construction in our context. And then of course financial, which we all know about: capital, operational costs, revenues and so on. So really fascinating stuff. I thought it was a real eye-opener for me there. And I'm also involved in discussions with a panel with Constructing Excellence about the procuring for value model. So there's an awful lot of thinking going on across all different parts of the sector on this. And it struck me, and I think other people have been on this journey a lot longer than I have, and it's taken me a while to catch up, perhaps, that the 5 capitals approach is the way we need to look at the business model. And I think that's a really useful way of doing things. So given that, and given the fact that the CLC has come up with its response to the COVID emergency and how we need to reset things, my question to myself this morning was, is the job of my manifesto that I've put together, is it done? So let's have a look. What I was going to talk to you about before I had this bit of an epiphany this morning when I was trying to prepare things, was I was going to cover procurement. Procurement drives an awful lot of the behaviours and the culture and the contracting and the finances of the industry. I thought it was really important. Employment is a big issue for the sector in terms of the business model. Too many people are employed as contractors and subcontractors. I think it's over 40% of the workforce is self-employed, so they've got no security of employment. Specifically contracts, and how the new contracts need to be evolved to try and encourage the use of modern methods of construction and encourage more collaboration. And I think that we need to balance what we look for in value from a built environment project to make sure we get the financial return. It's got to be driven by money, but there's a social value that needs to be in there, and that's why I wanted to build in the 5 capitals into that, my thinking there. And I'm still looking at this, but I think section 106 is something that, you know, it's seen as a bit of a pain by many people in the sector, but actually there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to really engage with communities. So I was looking at how the business model can be considering those areas and try and balance it. And then of course all these 2 things came up which completely overtook events, which is great. The roadmap for recovery, the CLC version, covers a lot of the areas I've defined already in the manifesto. I think there's an awful lot of overlap in there. And a lot of what they're suggesting we use and we do already exists, which is great. Why invent something if it's already there? Absolutely on board with that. But the question I have back, not that they'd listen to me or they'd be asking me the question, but the question I would have to them is, if all this is already there, and most of it is, then why isn't it working already? Why is it just by you saying this is what we need to do, is it going to happen? And I don't see that the cause and effect is there. I agree with a lot of things that they say need to happen, but they've already been there. Why isn't it happening already? And it feels to me like the approach, and I'm sure they're frustrated about this, that they feel that if it needs to happen, they can drive these changes. But the thing is, we've been doing this top-down approach to change in the built environment for at least 30 years. I've mentioned that right at the beginning of my series, since I think it was the Egan report way back. And having recognised that we've got an ecosystem out there, it's not a command and control economy out there in the built environment. It's an ecosystem of, I think they've got 450,000 companies identified in the data that they use in their report. So there's a lot of people working out there, and we need to try and influence those people, make them realise that the things that they need to do for the better of the industry are the things that will be better for them as well. So it doesn't really work top down. Go Construct is mentioned as the industry's careers website, which is great. I like Go Construct, but it's not the industry's careers website. If it was, people wouldn't spend lots of money doing other things. It does a part of it. It's not easy to collaborate with CITB to try and help influence and change what it does for different parts of the sector and the professions. Particularly, I've been involved in doing a little bit of that, and we need to have a more inclusive and more approach to try and get that sort of thing happening. And it talks about one mental health approach somewhere in the document as well. That isn't how mental health works. One solution doesn't work, and we need to have a number of approaches. It'll need to be personal, it need to be local. So you can't impose those things, and I fear that the Roadmap for Recovery does a little bit of that imposing as well. And as I said, you can't tell an ecosystem what to do. You have to influence it and point out how it can actually benefit from doing some of these things. But the Roadmap for Recovery is based heavily on the financial stuff. Of course it is. It's done by businessmen. It's run to the big companies need to make sure they get their business back on track. Can't blame them at all for that. And I don't want to say it's anything wrong with it. It's just I don't think it covers all of the bases. And for me, the drive to change needs to be a drive towards a balanced approach. I've avoided, I'm going to say it now, the balanced scorecard approach, because a lot of people did that 15, 20 years ago, but it is a balance between the financial and the hard-edged figures and numbers and the softer skills development, social impact type things, which people don't really like because you can't measure them as tangibly, but you can measure them to some extent, and we need to try and do that. So for me, what we've got so far is, if this is the approach, and those are the 5 capitals again listed out there for you. I think in terms of financial support, we've got a lot of, and not just financial, but the revenue and the capital and the backing of insurance, all those sorts of things. A lot of that is covered by the Roadmap for Recovery. I think that's a really good start there. And we've actually got a lot of those things already in existence. And there are some other new programs they suggest, which would really help with that. There's a manufactured approach. I think is not quite strong there. We don't encourage MMC. Just by encouraging it, we won't actually make it happen. We've got to try and provide incentives and find a way through making sure some of the technology is used to make more happen off-site and therefore reduce the COVID restrictions that we will see on-site. And the human stuff, they do talk about apprenticeships, they do talk about skills, but that's one of the areas where I think if we go back to where we were, we'll be failing and missing an opportunity to do things better. And there's a lot more we can do in the human side. It doesn't really cover social, doesn't really cover natural. So the question I posed myself at the beginning of this was, is the job of the manifesto done? I don't think it is. I think there's an awful lot more that we need to do. I think we need to somehow try and get this great work of the CLC, apply it with the work of ACE and the Constructing Excellence and the Construction Industry Hub and so on, and the people trying to do the 5 capitals as an approach for it and see if that applies to the business model and how can we make that work. So there's not so much, I think there's an awful lot more in this part of the manifesto that's already there, already ready to go. We just need to find a way of bringing it all together and making it much more of a concerted effort that will affect the ecosystem, not just by telling people what they need to do. So that's it for this week. Hope that's some food for thought for you. I really would recommend reading the some of those papers. The ACE particularly was a really good paper, I thought, and the CLC thing's got a lot of information there. It's a very good piece of work. It's helped me a lot in my research to understand what's going on out there. So there's some really good work being done. I think we can find a way of getting the whole sector to unite behind this, and that's the thing that's missing for me, and we can really make an impact here. So that's it. I think that's short today. I don't know how long it's gone on for, but a bit shorter than usual. And I look forward to talking to you next week when we talk about technology. Thank you for your time.